Hi friends, welcome back. This is Anne from the blog hiddenfarmlife.com. Today we are talking about making your own sourdough starter from scratch, so stay tuned. Over the summer, actually towards the end of the summer, here in south central Pennsylvania, we had a heat wave that was unusual and it was prolonged, and unfortunately I lost my sourdough starter, so I am starting another one today since so many of you have had questions. How do I do this? What do I do to maintain it? How do I even get started? What do I use? So that's what we're going to go over today. My sourdough starter, I guess we'll call it recipe, is a 7-day process, and at the end of those 7 days you should be able to use your sourdough starter in your recipes. So to get started, you're going to need a container. I like to use a 1-gallon jar that has a lid, and I like glass. You don't have to use a 1-gallon jar. I just keep a lot of sourdough starter because when I have sourdough starter, I use it for almost everything. A lot of people like to keep their starter in a mason jar, like a quart. Some people keep it in a 1/2 gallon. Some people I've seen keep it in a crock that you just sit out and use when you need it. That's another thing. If you're not planning on using your sourdough starter more than maybe once or twice a week, you can feed it and then keep it in the fridge. I keep mine on the counter, especially in the cooler months when the weather isn't most likely to contaminate it or interfere with the little guys bubbling up and producing those nice bubbles that we all know that are in sourdough bread. So to get started, you're going to need your favorite flour, and I'm using my home blend flour today. And if you'd like to know how I make this, I will pop that video up here and put it in a card. But this is day 1, so we'll mark this as day 1. I'm going to use 1 cup of my home blend flour. You can use all-purpose flour, you can use einkorn, you can use whole wheat, whatever you have and you like. So you want your jar, your container, whatever you're using to be clean and dry. I'm going to put my 1 cup of flour into my jar, and to that I am going to add 1 cup of water. Now I am on a well and we have had our water tested, and I've never had a problem using straight water out of the faucet. If you have public water and your water is treated or chlorinated or anything like that, you might want to consider using bottled water or filtered water. But this is what we're using today, and all I'm going to do is stir this and make sure that everything is well combined. And I want to make sure that I'm not slopping it all over the sides of the jar. And let me just, you know what, I'll stop here and I'll put the camera closer so you can see. See how it's gotten, it's almost pasty, a thick pancake batter maybe. But you want to make sure there aren't any dry parts of the flour left and that all the water has been absorbed by the flour. And you want to make sure, I mean, it doesn't have to be completely lump-free, but you want to make sure there aren't any big lumps left down in there, because that will be better for making those little air bubbles. So for day 1, we are done. After you mix up your flour and water, this is what it should look like. And it just looks, you know, like flour and water, like a paste. So when we're done with this, we're going to put the lid on the jar, or if you're using a mason jar, you want to cover it with maybe a cheesecloth and a band around the lid, or some people use like a coffee filter, a kitchen towel, whatever you have that you can keep it clean, but it allows the air. This is not airtight, this gets air, and I really like using this jar. So what I'm going to do now is this is going to sit, it's going to live on my counter for the next 7 days. So that's it for day 1. Stay tuned for day 2. Hi friends, welcome back. It is day 2 for our sourdough starter. So let me turn this around and show you what your starter may be looking like. As you can see, there is some liquid down in there, and some people refer to that as the hooch, and that's just a byproduct of the little organisms that are starting to develop. So on day 2, we are going to remove half of this mixture. So we're going to remove half of that and then repeat day 1 with 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water. So let me remove that. So again, I'm going to go in with 1 cup of my home blend flour. I'm trying to do this one-handed while I hold on to the camera. So please forgive these angles. So 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water. And for me, remember, I'm just using the water out of my tap. I'm on a well. If you have chlorinated or treated water, I highly recommend using either a bottled water or a water with a filter. So I'm just gonna mix this up and make sure that everything is well combined, making sure to not have many or any lumps, and making sure that there's no dry flour and that all of the water has been absorbed by the flour. And as you can see, it's going pretty quickly. I have my flour, since I mill my own flour, it's pretty fresh. And through the years, I've been experimenting with store-bought flour and fresh flour. I have better success with fresh flour. Now, I'm not saying by any means that you have to mill your own flour. That's just something that I do. But for me, I have been more successful when my flour is fresh. So there's what it's looking like for day 2. I'll see you tomorrow for day 3. Okay friends, it is day 3 of working on our sourdough starter. Let me show you what we are working with today. This is what it looks like on day 3. You can see lots of bubbles, and get in there. Can you hear that? It's starting to develop those air pockets, and there's a lot of the liquid that's from those little guys producing all of that. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat day 2 instructions. So we're going to discard half of this, and then we are going to add 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we'll be back. Okay, and in goes 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water. And then we're just going to stir that and make sure, just like the other days, that we get all of those lumps out and make sure everything is combined. So there it is, all nice and smooth. A few air bubbles, from stirring it around, but that's okay. So this was day 3. For days 3, 4, and 5, we are going to repeat the same thing. So that means tomorrow on day 4, and then the next day on day 5, we will discard half of our sourdough starter, and each day we will add 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water. So I will see you back here on day 6 when we do something different. So you've gotten to day 6, and we're going to do things a little bit differently. Up until this day, we have taken half of our sourdough starter out and replaced it with 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of water once a day. Starting with day 6 and day 7, we're going to take half of the starter out and replace it again with a cup of flour and a cup of water, but we're going to do that every 12 hours, so twice a day for days 6 and 7. And then by day 7, you should have enough beneficial bacteria in there crawling around and colonizing to make something. And I have already made pancakes. So let me turn the camera around and show you what this looks like once you have a mature sourdough starter. So your sourdough is mature. I don't know if you can see, I'll zoom you in. You see all those little bubbles in there? That's the beneficial bacteria. They're colonizing and they make gases, which is what causes the bubbles. And I'm not sure if you can see on the side, zoom you out. See, you can see all these little air bubbles in here, which are so classic of sourdough. When you eat the sourdough, and I'll show you, you put your wooden spoon in, see all those air pockets in there? That is when you know, one of the ways you know that you have a mature and ready sourdough starter to use. So you're thinking, why am I throwing out half of my sourdough starter every single time I feed it? The reason for that is if we continued to use the same amounts of flour and water to feed our sourdough starter and never threw anything out, we would have, even though this is a gallon jar, we would have so much starter in here and none of it would be mature enough to use for any kind of baking, because when you have an overabundance of starter but you're not increasing your feed, then it won't mature, and you need the colony of bacteria to mature. So that's why we use discard. Now, everybody knows that there are tons of recipes on the internet. You can look them up, sourdough discard recipes. It's easy enough to find. A lot of times I will use my discard for pancakes, and I'll just stow those pancakes in the freezer. Something else as far as maintenance, if you're going to have your sourdough starter live on your countertop, you will need to continue this feeding and watering every single day, and the discarding, unless you're going to do, you know, a lot of baking. If you know that you're going to use it maybe, you know, once, twice a week, you want to store it in your refrigerator, and it takes a little bit of planning. But if you know, like tomorrow, you want to bake bread, you get your sourdough starter out of the fridge the day before, the night before, feed it and water it, let it sit overnight so that the next morning it's ready to go for you, and you will see how it's grown. And it should probably double in size, and you can see how mine has gone up and then down as I've stirred it. So this is all about sourdough starter. I hope everyone has enjoyed this and found it helpful and useful. If you have any other questions or you like this content, please leave a comment below. Please remember to subscribe and share our channel. And until next time, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.